here with Steve Post, CEO of Vermont State Employees Credit Union, or more popularly referred to as VSECU, the only credit union in Vermont that I'm aware of that has a statewide field of membership, I believe. Steve was gracious enough to let us come into his office and talk to him for this episode of our Executive Exchange. And so, Steve, we're real glad to be here with you. Thank you for letting us in.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's great to be here.
Thank you, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. You know, you've been involved in credit unions and before VSECU here for quite a while, and we've known each other for quite a few years. And I just thought the best place to start is right at the beginning. So if you would, maybe you can just share with everyone how you got your start in credit unions and how it led to where you are today.
Well, it's sort of an interesting story from my point of view, anyway. My wife, Nancy, and I moved to Vermont in '78, and we moved to a little town called Rochester, Vermont. And we lived in a log cabin in the woods there for winter, and then we were looking to see what we were going to do longer term. And one of our neighbors came down one morning and said that the White River Credit Union was looking for a loan collector, and that I should take that job because I needed to be employed and working. And so I went down and talked, and I became the loan collector for White River Credit Union. And that evolved over time into a more full-time position, and then eventually manager. And I was there for 8 or 9 years, I think, in that position. And I then did a brief stint with what was then GE Credit Union in Burlington. And shortly after I started there, actually, the finance officer position came up at VSECU, and I took that and became CEO a couple years later.
Wow. And you're only the third chief executive in this credit union, if I remember correctly.
I am the third. Right there was Clyde Coffrin and Clyde Coffrin Jr. and Steve Post.
Wow. Well, that's quite a road that you took from the very beginning, moving to Vermont to get to here. You know, as the second largest credit union in the state and a statewide field of membership, you know, I think a lot of people have this you know, even if they don't know VSECU, they have this vague awareness of it and everything. But just so everyone's on the same playing field, maybe you can give us just kind of like a nutshell description of your credit union.
Sure. Currently, we're about 52,000 members. We are the only credit union in the state that has a statewide field of membership. So a person who lives or works in Vermont is able to join the credit union. And we have 8 branches, and expect to have a few more over the next year or two, and establish the sort of geographic presence around the state. About $620 million in assets right now, 160 employees, and that's it in a nutshell.
So, you know, originally a credit union for state employees and their family members. So is there still much of a state employee, what's the word I'm looking for, presence or
influence?
Core influence? Yeah.
Yeah, there's still a lot of state employee influence. Even though we have been a community chartered or community-based credit union for a lot of years now, it's still, they represent the core of our membership, and their family members represent another big component of that membership. So we're very closely aligned with employees of the state of Vermont, both past and present. But we have continued to expand and invite other Vermonters into the co-op as pretty much as aggressively as we can.
And you mentioned cooperative. You refer to VSECU as a co-op, a cooperative. And that reminds me that, you know, I think your credit union has had a fair amount of involvement and relations with other cooperatives, other types of cooperatives around the state from time to time. Like I'm thinking of an oil buyers club or fuel buyers club, and maybe something with Cabot Creamery and whatnot. So, you know, what are some of those kinds of things that have happened over the years?
Well, we're big proponents of the cooperative business model. So we try to first embrace those principles and live those day to day, year to year. But we also like affiliating with other co-ops who are out approaching the business world and the markets with the same principles as we have.
So that strikes me as being a little bit unique to VSECU, you know, credit unions nationwide are credit unions first and cooperatives second, and you know, we're all cognizant of the fact that we're cooperatives, but it's kind of, you know, in the back of the mind sort of, but here it seems to be a little bit more forefront in your business dealings and in your relations with other cooperatives.
We've moved it to the front. I think in general consumers have a clearer understanding of what a co-op is than what a credit union is, perhaps, or that's been the case in the past.
Right, right.
They're familiar with food co-ops and agri co-ops and so on and so forth. So the idea of co-op, I think, has a meaning in the marketplace that perhaps is a little better known than credit union.
So along those lines, before we started this interview, we were talking about the advertising that VSECU is doing right now on television, promoting your annual meeting in the election process that you have and voting and whatnot. And, you know, and online voting, I think it is that you're doing. And so VSECU has always struck me, but reinforced by this current ad, as a very member-centric kind of credit union, and you know, all credit unions are, but I'm thinking in terms of member involvement beyond just using services. You know, you have, I think you still have the largest or among the largest boards of credit unions in the state, and maybe much beyond that. You know, I seem to recall earlier, well, not this year, in 2013, some voting by members for where the credit union was going to allocate some charitable contributions to a couple different organizations, promoting on television your election process, and seems a lot more outreach efforts at getting members involved and whatnot. So I guess my question to you is all of that intentional, or is it something that's just kind of evolved you know, over the years?
Well, a little bit of both, actually. We are very member-centric, and we try to be. We consider the members the owners of the credit union, and we work to make them responsible owners of the credit union. So we encourage their participation. We have a member forum on every board meeting agenda that members can come if they choose and meet with the board. We encourage members to run for the board. We encourage elections and to have members vote in elections. That's what our current advertising is doing in one respect. It's also highlighting the difference between this institution and for-profit institutions or other people operating in the state, that we consider them owners and that they have the rights of ownership, includes the right to vote.
That's great. So do you think members think of your credit union a little differently that way as compared to, you know, other financial institutions, whether it be banks or other credit unions? You know, I mean, most credit unions would probably recognize that the majority, maybe not all, but the majority of their members, you know, come to the credit union because of rates and fees, or they needed that car loan or something like that. But, you know, do you think that what you just described, the member centricity, plays a role in attracting people to the credit union?
I think it does. It's hard to say how much. I think the consumer is still ultimately a price and convenience consumer.
Sure.
So you're going to have to offer that value in the marketplace just as table stakes to be in the game. But we do think our business model sets us apart from a huge part of the marketplace, and we like to emphasize that distinction.
So what about you? How many years have you been here?
26.
26 years. So you've seen a lot of things over almost 3 decades in the credit union industry and here at VSECU. So what, I don't know, are there any milestones that stick out in memory? Things that were major turning points in this credit union and in your career as a part of it?
The major turning points, I think, are more industry-based rather than unique to VSECU.
Mhm.
I think one of the most amazing parts about this industry is that for the 35 years I've been in it, it's always been a growth industry. It's always been growing and having more potential. I sit here today with the same sense that we have more potential ahead of us than we've tapped into in the past. And so those milestones really tie right into what the industry has done in terms of statutory authority to be full service financial institution. The rewrite of the Vermont Credit Union statutes was big to VSECU. We think big for all Vermont credit unions. But we were really intensely interested in seeing the statute get rewritten so that Vermonters would have an option of a viable, strong, cooperative financial institution.
Good points. So what's the biggest challenge, you think, for whether it's VSECU or credit unions as a whole these days?
I think the challenges are huge and getting bigger, actually. Adding value.
I say huger, too.
Yeah, huger, too. Adding value in today's marketplace is extremely challenging. And unless you're going about this really consciously trying to analyze the market enough and identify opportunities for adding value as opposed to just duplicating efforts that are already being offered, I think it's going to be a hard road for that type of institution. I think credit unions, perhaps more than ever, have to adopt a innovative, sort of wide-eyed approach to what we can do and add value to our members' lives. And we should be exploring that every day, every year.
So do you think, Steve, that for the members that you have, that means the have to be all things to all people at one end of the pendulum, or do you think that as time goes on, that because everybody tries to do that, that your credit union or any given credit union, depending on the situation, is going to have to be more narrowly focused and specialize more?
I think there will be different answers. I think you could take different roads to tackling the problem and become more specialized or simply become different in some other way.
Something you said made me think back to, it's about service to members, thinking back to, disaster situations where people really need the assistance of their credit union and others, and Irene here in Vermont. And as a statewide credit union, I'm guessing you were exposed to a fair number of member stories around the state that were really extreme situations where maybe VSECU did things that were out of the normal course of business for some of those people.
We absolutely did. That's one of the greatest things about credit unions. You have the ability to do things differently and treat people differently than you might otherwise. Not that others don't have that too, but we take it very seriously. In the case of Irene, we had several members who literally lost everything and had no home, no ability to rebuild a home in the location that they lost it. And we made some very big decisions in terms of debt forgiveness and loan options for members that were extraordinary and got these people back into homes. And the great part of it is that those members have stayed with us and have continued to make good on all that we did for them as well. That's
great. And those people will be married to VSECU for the rest of their lives, probably.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah, that's great. So let's look forward for a second. And you can say anything you want because nobody knows. Nobody has a crystal ball. But, 10 years down the road, or whatever point down the road, what do you think credit unions look like?
That's a good question. I hope we look more and more like a successful cooperative alternative in the marketplace. And maybe it's in areas beyond just financial services, or maybe it's different types of financial services, whether it's insurance or financial planning, but it is an industry that's built on the principles of the cooperative movement and of people helping people. And as I said before, I think today more than ever we need to innovate our way through the current marketplace and create some new value.
So if it was, and now I'm going to jump backwards again, so if it was 26 years ago or 35 years ago, I think you said when you were starting out, on the decisions that you've made, and certainly as CEO here, and then your positions in other careers before this, you've had a lot of influence in the organization in the direction that it takes. So anything you think back on that you might have done differently or gone in a different direction?
Done differently? I'd have to think about that for a while. I'm sure other people around here could answer that question better than
Yeah,
me.
that's always the case, right? Everyone else can tell you what
Right.
you should have done differently.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking in terms of, is there, like, in the case of Irene, are there more things that you think you would have done or done things differently? Of course, nobody can foresee the future, so, easier to say in hindsight. Data processing wise, technology, things, maybe opportunities that arose at a moment and you had to make a call, and the call would be different today than it was at the time.
Well, I guess the only time I've ever feel like I've gotten in trouble here is when I've lost sight of the member ownership and that the members need to drive the institution.
Good answer.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's true.
Yeah, no, that's a good thought. Great answer. So, any advice you'd have for anyone that's coming along, just starting out as you did 30 years or so ago or so, for getting into credit unions for the first time?
I guess my advice would be find a purpose as opposed to starting a job. And by that I mean, if you come into this business, you should be purpose-driven and want to accomplish more than a livelihood, and hope to rally people around that activity.
Have a mission, not just a paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good advice.
Maybe. That and a sense of humor.
You need the sense of humor, oftentimes, yes.
Sense of
definitely
purpose,
so.
sense of humor.
Well, thank you very much for letting me come in and chat with you for a while. And, we've enjoyed our time. Any parting comments at all?
No, it's
No.
been great.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Steve.
All right,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.